We're going into the section which is a case study. It says Sonoma's top 10 list for resiliency. What we're really going to do right now is we're going to try and bludgeon you with things, not stories of what we've done, but here's what you can take into your county, or here's what we can model out statewide, and here's the kind of products that we can be a part of. We want this to be a solution space. We've spent a lot of time talking about the fires, talking about the trauma. We've had block captains present. We've had everybody. That is not the goal of this panel, is to provide any more context. The goal of this panel is to come in and say, here's what you can do that is something that actually achieved a measurable response in our community and can be used in others, okay? So we're going to go through and allow each of our presenters to go into that. And just to kind of tell you how this is going to go, what we have is we have Representatives Grant Davis and Jay Jasperse from Sonoma Water. We as the Board of Supervisors are actually on the board of our public utility here. But what they have done in terms of resilience with pre-disaster mitigation grants, with forecast-informed reservoir operations, with the connection between tech and how to manage resources has been a leader not just in the state but in the nation. And that is not hyperbole. That is a very real statement. The second, Chris Godley, our Director of Emergency Management. I want everybody to give him a round of applause. He's been doing chasing around power shutdown craziness, and I want to thank you for taking an hour to be with us. The focus here is not to go into PSPS, but to actually talk about our alert and warning system and how you turn that from something that you try and figure out internally to into the community. Mike Gossman, our Deputy County Administrator and the head of our Office of Recovery and Resilience that we created immediately after the fires, and the architect of helping pull all of us together to create a recovery and resiliency plan framework that has gotten national awards through NACO and others, and is a model that we took a lot of drafts from other communities and then improved upon it, and we want other communities to do the same. Bill Carter is our head of managing our heads. He is with the Department of Health Services and manages our behavioral and mental health. And there was a wildfire mental health collaborative that we've talked about a little bit. And so we want them to go through and talk about not setting the scene, not all these other things, but here's what we can use. And then we'll get into a Q&A a little bit, and we'll identify more things as we go.
Like Supervisor Gore said, my name is Michael Gossman. I'm a Deputy County Administrator and head of the Office of Recovery and Resiliency. And the Office of Recovery and Resiliency, as Supervisor Gore alluded to, was created probably within a month after the fires in 2017. It was a recognition by the board that, not only did we need to fully recover from what was at the time the most disastrous wildfire in the history of California, but we also needed to come back better than we were before, more prepared and more resilient. And so we set about, in our first task, was to create this recovery and resiliency framework. At the end of this slideshow, there's some links you can go on, you can check it out, you can see what we did. But the key thing here, when we set out to build this recovery and resiliency framework, was that we broke it down into 5 key strategy areas. One was community preparedness and infrastructure. We knew that we could do a better job, like every community can do a better job in preparing its community for the next disaster and making them aware of what's coming and where it's coming from, and we've made a lot of strides in that area. Chris will talk about it, I'll talk about it a little bit. Second strategy area was housing. We already were in a housing crisis like a lot of California prior to the fires, but when your largest city, Santa Rosa, loses 5% of its housing stock, that only exacerbates that issue. So we knew right away that going long term, we needed to do something about our housing issue, and short term as well, finding housing for the people that had lost their homes. Thirdly was the economy. We wanted to make sure we had a strong economy before the fires. We wanted to make sure that we maintained that strong, diverse economy where where we're a place where tech wants to be, where agriculture wants to be, where tourism wants to be. And we worked with the Economic Development Board, and they developed their own strategic plan around how to maintain that economy. Safety net services refers to our most vulnerable citizens. So often, as you see around the country, it's those citizens and residents that are most hardest hit by any disaster. So what we wanted to do was make sure that they were taken care of, and by taking care of them, it allows us to support these other things: economy, housing, community preparedness, and infrastructure. And I think that's key. All of these work together. And lastly was natural resources, both protecting us from our natural environment in the sense of fires and overgrowth in our forests and dead and dying trees, but also protecting our natural resources from us. Those things work together well too. In fact, one success story right after the fires was that we worked with the state and something called a watershed emergency response team to go out and deploy hundreds and hundreds of best management practices in terms of protecting our watershed. And that was very successful in terms of protecting water quality and from landslides and flash floods. Community engagement. So we could have just gone out and wrote a recovery and resiliency framework based on what we knew were the issues were, just wrote it down and handed it out and said, well, there you go, there's your recovery and resiliency framework. But one of the things I'd mentioned earlier was we wanted to come back better. Well, what does better mean? Well, better might mean one thing to me, it might mean another thing to Chris, and we're both brilliant, but there's a lot of people in this county, and they deserve a say in what does better look like to them. And so what we did was we went out and we engaged with something like 700 citizens and residents in these community engagement forums where we had some introductory statements, and then we went into tabletops and we asked them and just wrote down their ideas. We documented everything. We put everything online, and then we went through and we hashed through and we combined a lot of the ideas and a lot of the initiatives that they'd proposed, and we put all that into the recovery and resiliency framework. We also are very proud of the fact that we doubled down on outreach to our Latino, Hispanic, Spanish-speaking community. We had 2 of these forums all in Spanish, not translated, in Spanish, and we are lucky in this county to have a workforce that has a really healthy bilingual staff, and so we're able to bring them in. Supervisor Gore, many of you may know, is fluent in Spanish. He kicked off some of these so that he was the face for the county, and that went really well. We got some really great feedback, and we continue to engage with that community, and we've been able to put some of the things that the blind spots that we had, we were able to put that into use during the floods that we had in March. Well, that gets us to our top 10 list, which is alluded to in the agenda. Total, there were something like 256 identified different actions in the framework. Like I said, all those can be found online. But we said we're going to set out in this year, what do we want to move the needle on this year? So we worked with the board. We worked with fire survivors, we worked with other community members, subject matter experts, and we identified the top 10 things that we wanted to do. One was we wanted to establish a comprehensive alert and warning system. Chris will talk about that in a little bit, what we've done, where we've moved the needle, and we have made the needle, and the public safety power shutoff and the floods were great test cases for how we're doing a better job there. We wanted to work with the community to identify hazards, risks, mitigation strategies, and importantly, evacuation routes. And we'll talk a little bit about what we've done there. We want to facilitate a construction hardening techniques appropriate for wildfire urban interfaces, otherwise known as WUI, which is fun to say, and seismic retrofits. And what we're doing there is we have two programs right now that facilitate that. One is we're in the final stages of seeking grant funding under Hazard Mitigation Grant Program through FEMA to put some seed funding into a program that will help people retrofit their houses, and we're prioritizing those areas that are in the WUI. And the other piece is that we have a PACE program in Sonoma County. I'm not sure how many counties here have in the room have a PACE program, but we're under a law. I think it was Senator Hannah Beth Jackson. She put a bill forward. It was approved that allowed PACE funding to be used for seismic and wildfire retrofits. And so we've incorporated that into our PACE program as well. We're working with private utility providers on hardening infrastructure. The public safety power shutoffs is actually an example of one way to try to, you don't want to forget that there is a reason why we're doing this. Yes, they're inconvenient. Yes, they're a pain. Yes, they're dangerous. But it is to prevent wildfire. We're also undergrounding right now. We have a project out in West County that it's 5 miles, $5 million, and takes 5 years. So these are long projects, and that's why it's so important that PG&E and other investor-owned utilities get on that now, and that's what we're advocating for with CPUC, is to get them to do more and also to loosen the purse strings on what we can use that money for so we can do more projects in Sonoma County. We want to help property owners navigate vegetation management. That is the clearing the dead and dying trees around in their property, but also creating defensible space around their own house. And that goes not just for private property owners, but government property owners. What does the county itself need to do better as well? We're advocating for substantive changes to insurance regulations. We saw a lot of movement on that area. Most of that movement, unfortunately, for survivors of the 2017 fires is retroactive, but we have seen significant changes in insurance regulations, and we're going to continue to advocate to see more changes because there's a lot that can be done in the world of insurance. We're engaging the community to raise awareness. I think the best example of that, I have one slide on it, is we did a Sonoma Ready Day. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And Chris's team has done a ton on getting the word out there about what people can do to be more prepared themselves. And we're going to continue with that messaging. The Board of Supervisors invested a lot of money into that program, and we're going to put it to good use. Expedited permitting for homeowners who are rebuilding. Right by the end of the year, 50% of those who lost their home will either be completely rebuilt. It's actually 65%. Will either be completely rebuilt or in construction. So we have a long way to go, but I heard you guys, some of you were able to do a tour of Coffey Park. That's a great example of where we're seeing marked progress. But there's other areas where there's still a lot to be done. So, but the good news is that so far it has not been the permitting centers in either the city of Santa Rosa or the county of Sonoma where any bottleneck existed. Enhancing the 211 system. The Board of Supervisors just this year has invested an additional $400,000, partnered with United Way to step up and replicate what you see in some counties like San Diego County. That's a comprehensive 211 system that can pivot during a disaster and become that one-stop shop for information where people can go and they know exactly where to go. And lastly, it's developing a one-stop shop resource center, which has been a struggle to get off the ground, but the goal would be in a future disaster that we have a place like a local assistance center, but for anybody who's looking to rebuild, where they can go get advice, make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, and make sure that they're doing the right thing in terms of rebuilding. Like most of us, this came actually from one of our department heads who lost her fire. Here she is. She's somebody with a graduate degree, very well educated, very smart, but she knows nothing about building a house, and why should she? She never wanted to. So she felt vulnerable and wanted a place where she could go and get some good objective advice. So I talked about most of these accomplishments when I was going through the top 10, so I will just mention on external grants and funding. So far we've applied for over $36 million in grants, and we're hearing promising things coming back. We're hoping that by November we'll actually start seeing cash in the door. So this was the Sonoma Ready Day that I had mentioned. We were able to raise enough money to give out 2,500 disaster preparedness kits. We had over 70 different resource agencies providing information to the public. We had 5,000 people attend. In fact, the only criticisms that we could find were it was too darn crowded, too much traffic, couldn't get in. To me, that's just a testament to the success of the event. So we were really pleased with what we were able to do with Sonoma Ready Day, and we're going to make that an annual event. And we won an award from NACO for our framework. And I think I'll just close and say that the one thing that Supervisor Gore said was, you can all do this. It's all replicable. You just have to be attentive about it, and it does make a difference. Having a plan does make a difference. So I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thank you, Mike. We'll switch over to Chris. One thing just to remind yourself is that we actually created an Office of Recovery and Resiliency. Mike leads it. How many FTEs did we have in it at max?
7 FTEs, but 12 staff.
Right? 7 FTEs, 12 staff. So you can imagine, that is the only area of your world which can stay on mission 2 years later, because everybody else has to go back and manage what they were managing before and after the fires, right? So it's a big benefit to have. So thank you very much. Chris?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for taking time to talk about this. As an emergency manager, we can fuss around the edges, but it really does take leadership at that local level to really move the organization forward. I'll share with you as part of our presentation, this was hard. I was a resident here when the fires broke out. I was doing consulting after 20 years in local government, and lo and behold, my backyard, it was time to jump into the fight. So that's how I got into it. There's a lot of talent locally. You just got to find it. You've heard about our fire experience. I will share with you there was significant community feedback following the fires regarding the use of the alert and warning system in Sonoma County. Sonoma County was on par with most counties in the year of 2017, having systems in place, including the potential for using the federal warning system known as Wireless Emergency Alert, or WEA. Most of you now have access to that. In 2017, the county elected not to use the system because it was unstable, was the consideration by most emergency managers at the time. The public did not see it that way. And so that criticism, that controversy, that firestorm literally afterwards actually shaded, if you would, the perception of the community in terms of the county government's overall response. And this is a highlight for you in emergency management. If you blow it one way, your reputation will be tarnished significantly, no matter how well you do across the other sectors. So for alert and warning, going door to door is not what you want to do. You want to build out your technologies. We're looking at a system of systems. The key to this, and the one thing I want to suggest that you do right now, go and exercise it. Fire the thing up. Don't push the button and see if the light comes on. Actually deliver real code messages to your community using these various technologies. The bottom line is that these two technologies do not work as advertised. They'll hit half the people you've got subscribed to the list. They'll hit 2/3 of your cell phone providers. And I'll show you just a couple highlights here from our results. We plotted not the actual delivery of wireless alert messages to the community, because you cannot do that. The technology does not have a feedback loop. Instead, we in real time invited the community to give us survey responses, and we plotted those geographically in real time. That gave us a feel for how well was the message going out, and we targeted 5 geographic areas just to see what would happen in 5 different topographies and urban settings, that kind of thing. So as we targeted those areas, you can see there's a significant spillover, as we call it. You may aim for one city and it's going to go 10 miles around it. It's just going to be a massive mess. There's just no way to avoid that this time. We have been trying to engage with the federal government on getting that issue addressed to geofence, if you would. That's supposed to roll out next month. I'm not holding my breath. Also, we are dependent in local government on 2 systems, the Federal Integrated Public Alert Warning System, or IPAWS for short, which we is part of, and we're also dependent on the private wireless broadband sector. We have no control over either of those, but the community believes we do. So you have to educate your community, like we're at the mercy of the big kids that you pay your monthly bill to. So for example, this is a highlight from our test last year where we said, let's target the same geographic area. How does AT&T perform? How does Verizon perform? Literally the same test, same time, same geographic area. This is the results from the 2 different carriers. Okay, you can see the disparity between the performance in the different carrier systems. The one with the least, who's got AT&T? Okay, no, it's Verizon. Verizon blew it on this test. So AT&T came through, all right? But this highlights for your community, and this is why we do public education. These systems don't work as advertised. Just because you can order a Domino's pizza or get Amazon to deliver something the next day doesn't mean the same level of capability is inherently present in our alert and warning systems. There's just not enough money in it to drive that kind of performance capability. So as we go forward, charting a new course in addition to alert and warning, we were focused heavily on the emergency management program. It is important to know emergency management is essentially migrating away from public safety. Where it used to be just law and fire, if they couldn't handle it, you call the weird civil defense guy and he comes out there and he deals with it. We're now seeing emergency management really as an extension of overall organizational management, more of a crisis management module you slap on to leadership and they can handle whatever the crisis of the day is. This requires significant commitment. Given the significant community interest here since the fires, the feedback that wasn't necessarily positive, the County Board of Supervisors really seriously stepped up here. Not just saying, oh, let's write a new plan, put a binder on the shelf. They really took it to heart. They've invested significant amount of community engagement time and board time to discuss the issues relating to emergency management and preparedness. So rather than having emergency management kind of be stuck inside another department like fire and emergency services, as was the case, they elected to create a whole new emergency management department to elevate the function within the structure of the county government, not only to increase influence within the county structure, but also with the cities, to be quite honest, and special districts. So to that end, there was a significant investment. This was on par for the year 2017 as most emergency management organizations at the county level in the state of California. There are about 4 staff there for a population of 500,000 folks, just under 1 per 100,000. That's pretty much still par for the course for most of the counties in the state of California. But given the increasing demand for services, the complexity of disaster response and recovery, and to be quite honest, public expectations, that's not cutting it. This is the new department. We've gone from 4 staff to 12 staff, $800,000 to $2.4 million, the bulk of which is general fund. And in a very tough fiscal year, the board elected to not fill vacancies, actually eliminate some positions in order to staff a robust emergency management department. It's not just planners sitting in the back room typing up exotic plans and having exercises. We're heavily invested now in alert and warning, as I mentioned, 2 dedicated full-time staff. This technology is way too difficult for someone to look at this on Tuesday afternoons and figure it all out. You need dedicated staff to make this effective as a program and not just a piece of technology. We're also heavily invested in community preparedness, as Mike alluded to. It's a dedicated disaster community preparedness program manager. It's one of 3 in the state of California. But that's what it's going to take to keep somebody focused on integrating and educating the community, but more importantly, moving the community not just with information, like, oh, have a disaster kit, and here's what you need to do with flashlights. We've been through that. It doesn't work. We want to engage the community conversation, moving them into action. We will continue to educate a large portion of the community, but we're really aiming at the 20% of the community that's poised to take action, to actually develop a kit, to sit down with their families, to put an emergency plan together for their business. About 20% of our residents are poised. They have enough information. They just need a nudge. They need some encouragement. And so that's what our focus is on as a community preparedness program. We've also expanded traditional emergency management because we need to take on a larger role supporting our cities and special districts and engaging in that level. So, and then very briefly with the alert and warning program, that gives you a lot more performance. It's important to note there's another significant commitment here that the County Board of Supervisors made. You all know that your staff at the county level and the municipal level are disaster service workers in California law. That means they can be put to work doing things that are way outside of the bargaining unit agreement if there's a proclaimed local emergency. But what the board did is they said, in order to make sure that those people are ready to go to work, every county employee in the county of Sonoma now has to dedicate up to 1% of their total staff time to disaster preparedness. 99% of the time, just do your job, go on vacation, but 1% of the time, you have to go play with Chris. That means you have to be trained as an emergency operations center staff, maybe a department staff, maybe you're going to be a disaster damage assessment inspector in the field, you're going to support a shelter, or you're invested in our continuity of operations plan, or COOP. That was the other big investment, and we did that in May this year, and it is paying off in spades, literally this week, as PG&E plays around with us. That's what's enabling county government to continue to function as having a robust COOP program. It's doable. It's not that hard. I can share with you all the documents that your people will need. It's on Word doc. I give it to you all. Evacuation planning, our residents demand it. They want to know which way to go. And so we're doing community-based evacuation planning where we engage with them, do an exercise on a Saturday morning, and they all drive down the hill so they socialize and get some muscle memory. I'll also mention finally, I am a director of emergency management. It's a rare position in the state of California. Most of your emergency managers are just that. They're seen as technician, mid-level management. The board elevated my position so that I could work directly with peer department heads now to influence the larger county organization and work effectively now with city managers. That was an important step. It's a great ego boost. I love that, but it's really significantly increased my effectiveness to walk into a room and know that I can engage meaningfully with department heads and city managers on a peer basis. It's been extremely effective. And then the big three takeaways that I wanted to share with you, if I can remember this, is the game has changed. If you like climate change, put your money on that. If you think your utilities are screwing with you, yeah, that's happening. But this is not the same thing we saw 20 years ago in terms of public safety and emergency management. We have to evolve as well. To be quite honest, public expectations, and that's a large part of our issue with alert and warning feedback after the fires, public expectations are significantly increased in what local government's going to do during a disaster situation. Your alert and warning program has to be a program and not a piece of technology. You have to invest in the community, educate them what's going on with alert and warning, how do they engage with the technologies, how do they plug this device in, what works for deaf and hard of hearing community, and how do you feed that beast? How do you get enough real-time situational awareness to make your warnings effective? And that means it's a program and not just the latest vendor piece of software that you're going to want to have. And I did mention the public expects more. So those are the drivers. I shared a few of the highlights we got. I will share with you, we did hand out a copy of our de-energization annex because that's the topic du jour. We do have 200,000 people without power today. But this is an example of the product that your emergency management program should produce for you. It's not focused necessarily on coordinating tactical response by law and fire. It's focused on executive management of organizations and the ability to coordinate multiple organizations, not only your county departments and agencies, but your cities and special districts and other allied stakeholders. So I highlight that here for you today. This is what you should expect out of your emergency management program.
So good afternoon. I'm Grant Davis, General Manager of Sonoma Water. I'm really proud to be up here with my colleagues and sharing a little bit with you. Jay Jasperse, our Chief Engineer and Director of Groundwater Management. We're going to tag team, but use the same allotted time as we get back to Bill. For me, there's got to be a culture of shared learning. And with all of you, I see colleagues that we work with statewide and other communities. I hope that next year is going to be about the year of resiliency, because we learned from San Diego, for example, how they responded to theirs. And I know when Mike talked about Sonoma Ready Day, we learned that from San Mateo. We've got to have an ability to learn from each other's different experiences and create I would say, the area of best learning and be able to share that so when you experience your next natural disaster, will be better prepared. I want to commend CSAC for the leadership that they have shown on this issue. The reason we're here, James Gore, Director of the Sonoma County Water Agency, as well as a Supervisor, we integrate, and so in some ways, because water's part of the county family, we have some significant advantages, but don't let that deter you from taking ownership of some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. When the fires came through, that was on the heels 4 years of a drought, and it was only broken by something called an atmospheric river that Jay will probably talk about, created some of the worst flooding that we've had in recent memory. That was on the heels of an earthquake. And I can't believe how ironic it is. We're sitting here in the middle of largest power outage planned, and you're in Sonoma County talking about resiliency. Look at your timing. So James, thanks for bringing us here. Very briefly, I want to focus in on how that works. Our PACE program, which has become the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program, started in drought because the water agency was worried about the type of rate increases that might accrue by using less water and paying more, which happened, I guarantee you, in many of your districts. When you use less water, you have to cover your fixed costs, and so your rates go up. We came up with a program using state legislation that let you use permanently affixed water conservation and energy conservation onto your home and then put that onto your tax bill, and it's actually ahead of the first mortgage, which creates problems, but it's that type of innovation that comes from crisis. And I think our board gives us a bit more flexibility to look at the R&D required to push out new ideas and see what you can replicate when it works and shut it down when it doesn't work. That is the story of Sonoma Water right now, and I'm going to let Jay go into some of the detail on how we responded to the fires, but this is not just about fires. It's about climate and extreme weather, and we're trying to all get better prepared, and there's ways that you can do it, and I think that's what the supervisor wants to share with you with his leadership, your involvement. Next year's got to be about the state making a tangible investment into local entities that need to do climate adaptation planning. That's my theme. We do not have the funds to do that. How are you going to know what you need to do if you don't know where your risks and your vulnerabilities are? So we need a state mechanism to support all of you to do the climate action planning so you know where to prioritize. Jay?
Thank you, Grant, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Just to tag on to what Grant talked about, I'll talk a little bit just briefly here on some of the programs in terms of building resiliency that we've been involved with. And we look at, we're looking at resiliency not just now, but also in the future. We manage quite a bit of infrastructure here, both with a regional water supply system that provides water to over 600,000 people. We have eight separate wastewater districts we manage, and we also have flood control. So clearly, that infrastructure is prone to a lot of the hazards we've been talking about. Clearly, seismic is probably our number one, but right behind it is wildfire. It used to be seismic, droughts, floods, and wildfires. Then after 2 years ago, it's seismic and wildfires, and then floods and droughts, kind of the way we look at it. Nevertheless, our responsibilities and the way the programs we have to develop to build resiliencies range from anything from specific infrastructure to river systems and reservoirs that we manage with the Corps of Engineers to watersheds. And so some things we can handle just individually and with ourselves. Others, we have a lot of partners, and most of our watersheds are privately owned, which adds some complexity in terms of implementing programs when you have a privately owned watershed, as opposed to a lot of our colleagues who are working in the Sierra Nevadas and maybe have the Forest Service to work with, or BLM. So that's a whole layer of complexity, and really enforces partnerships in all of this. And that's key to what we do when we look at programs where we're investing in. The other thing I would say that certainly I realized from the fires 2 years ago is breaking down silos. And one example of that is in terms of monitoring out in the in data communications, et cetera, emergency communications. We who are involved with utilities and resource management have our own way of looking at things and systems we're responsible for, and then there's the public safety side of things, and there was very little crossover in our region at least, and yet a lot of commonalities here. And so now the fires, and coming out of the fires, there has been a lot more interaction and a lot of kind of sweet spots that we found where we can leverage each other both for funding and just do multi-benefit data management and collection systems, and borrow each other's equipment to get the job done for purposes of emergency management, public safety, as well as resource management. And so I think that was one of the things that we've realized here that's been an important lesson learned. Just quickly, some of the projects we're involved with to build resiliency. We're involved with many partners on one of our reservoirs here. It's kind of the first of its kind, working with the Corps of Engineers in particular for one of our reservoirs to use data on weather forecasting systems to operate our reservoirs a little differently than the Corps usually does, to be more adaptive to floods and to droughts. And this shows a lot of promise to build resiliency in our regional water systems. And so we're quite excited about that. And based on the program we're working on here in Lake Mendocino, there's now a similar project that's been started down at Prado Reservoir in Orange County. And then just recently, Lake Oroville and New Bullards Bar are following a similar type of a project. Again, with the data and the innovation towards monitoring and forecasting of the weather, it's really been an important thing. But that same instrumentation can be used in another project that we are involved with, which has more of a public safety bent. We can use those radars and that same kind of equipment for better monitoring and better notification of when there might be urban flooding. And we're part of a project where we got a grant from the Department of Water Resources for the Bay Area, and we're the lead for that in terms of the grant, along with SFPUC, Santa Clara Valley Water District, and East Bay Mud and others, where we're putting in these gap-filling radars that will help with our reservoir project I mentioned, but it also will help Chris and his team understand, and the National Weather Service, where the strong bands of rain are going to come in and what the impacted communities might be. with a better forecasting out to about 6 hours in advance. And so here we have a win-win, both the long-term with reservoir management and with public safety urban flooding. We're really invested in local hazard mitigation plans, and we've been successful in getting a lot of funding for seismic resiliency, and we've done a lot of work there. But now what we're doing is, with some recent changes in FEMA's rules, climate risk projects are now allowed to be put in the same program. So we're developing a climate adaptation plan, and we're going to start folding those types of projects, whether it be flooding or drought or wildfire related projects, into the same funding source that we've been getting seismic resiliency funding. So that's an initiative we're busy on. There's a few other things coming out of the fire, but I would say that one of the things that we came out of the fire, our agency, is we were as concerned after the fire about the big storm, the atmospheric river coming in, and with landslides and flooding. And so that was a big concern too. It wasn't just the fire was horrible, but we had to stay on it and put in systems to guard against the post-fire hazards too. With that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Okay. So I was not in Sonoma County at the time of the fires. I was the mental health director in Napa County, so I dealt with it on a different scale, and we did the crisis counseling program that followed our fires that Sonoma did. So I want to give credit to the folks that were here, and I'll talk about some of them as I offer you some notes. The response to the fires was a partnership between the federal government and the state government, which generated the funding with local counties that built the programs on the ground to respond to the aftermath of the fires. And the response itself is built on the understanding that the impact on your mind, the psychological impact of a trauma like this, is very similar to and different from the body's response to a physical trauma. And the similarities are these, right? If a group of us all tripped and fell, we would have a different response to that. Some of us would get up and dust ourselves off and walk away. Those are folks younger than I am. Some folks would trip and fall and might have a sprained ankle. And some might trip and fall and have a serious outcome like a compound fracture or a concussion. So everybody is going to respond differently. And the response needs to keep that in mind. You need to have a continuum, be able to outreach to folks along that continuum. You know, for that person, the other commonality is we are programmed to heal biologically. Our bodies heal. And so if you have a sprain, that sprain is likely going to heal on its own if you do nothing at all. But if you have some good information, if you know the acronym ICE, which is to put ice on it, compress it with a wrap, and elevate it, you know that you're going to heal better and faster. So when you have information, you heal faster and better. And if you have a serious trauma impact, like a compound fracture, your body will heal. It just won't do it well, right? Your bone will be crooked. You will have a abnormality that you will have to deal with the rest of your life. So that if you know that if you get to a professional who can set that bone and make sure that the healing process is able to get you where you started out, that's the way to a better outcome. And so that's the same kind of thing we do in a trauma response, which is we get people information so they can heal faster, and we can help that natural healing process along. And we identify those folks who have more serious impacts, and we get them to professionals who can help them set that bone right and get back to where they want to be. The crisis counseling program that is funded by FEMA through the states apply for the money, and then the states make that money available to the counties. That program comes with a structure that is responsive to what I just described to you. In this case, it is not a program that is based on professionals. This is a community-based intervention. This is designed to identify members of the community, people who are already active helpers in the community, and give them evidence-based, research-supported information that enables them to do outreach in the community that is effective. So the first characteristic of it is that you don't sick a bunch of therapists on the county. You find those folks that are already out there, you give them information, and then you have them do outreach in the field. And they have to do outreach in the field because a difference between our physical healing and our mental healing processes are there is stigma associated with mental trauma that's not associated with physical trauma, right? For better, well, for worse. We are taught in our culture, be strong, don't be mentally weak, and we suffer for that. So you can't, whereas somebody who's broken arm is telling them go see the doctor, somebody suffering trauma may not understand they're experiencing trauma. They may know they're in trouble, but they don't want to go and get help because of any number of fears and misperceptions they have associated with stigma. So the other component of this program is you do field-based community outreach. You don't wait for people to come to you. You send people out into the communities and you make contacts that help you identify folks to whom you can give information they can use to help themselves heal or help their loved ones or people close to them heal. And by the way, people are much more responsive to the idea of, I want to give you some information so you can help your wife or your husband or your neighbor than they are, asking for help for themselves. And so we partnered with local community-based organizations who have deep roots in the community to train paraprofessionals to do this outreach. So we worked with the Council on Aging, Petaluma People Services Center, the West County Community Services, and the Redwood Empire Goodwill Industries. And so those entities joined us. We trained their staff, who are not mental health professionals, in trauma-informed care, gave them information, and organized an outreach process. We built on the block captain model, which sounds like you heard about earlier. It was nice to have people in the community we could contact who knew who was having trouble or what were some of the general sentiments in the community that seemed to be getting in the way. And we were able to tailor our response, either by doing an individual outreach to somebody or creating a community event to which people could come that was responsive to concerns they had. And in addition to providing services to people, train them so that they are in a position to help others. The program is designed to not just deal with the traumatic event at hand, but to use this process to build capacity that's ongoing. And that's been what Sonoma's experienced. So our floods in Guerneville this year, we mobilized the people who had already been trained and who are very comfortable at this point reaching out to the community to go to Guerneville and do outreach to the people that are there. When there was an apartment fire that had a big impact on a neighborhood, we were able to respond to that neighborhood. So the CCP project was one that over the year and a half that we received funding for that, we built resources that we now need to continue to invest in to keep them active in the community, and it's well worth that intervention, that investment. We have the benefit of a successful request from our Board of Supervisors to the state for additional help. This recognizes that Sonoma County's had an unusual set of trauma over the last number of years. One of the indicators in which that shows up is in our rates of death by suicide. Rates are increasing across the country and the state, but Sonoma is higher than average. We can't say that's because of the fire, but we do know that traumatic events like that increase the likelihood of death by suicide. Economic loss increases the possibility of death by suicide. Homelessness, other stressors, and the accumulation of stressors causes that as well. So we have some additional resources this year that we're going to use to continue the crisis outreach, which will focus on training different aspects of the community and how to respond to trauma, everyone from professionals to folks who have contact with people in trauma, like primary care physicians in schools, motel staff, to the general public. And we will be able to access that this year. Wanted to let you know that all of your counties have invested in state suicide prevention program called Each Mind Matters. That's operated by the Joint Powers Agreement CalMesa. And you have access to the suicide prevention program materials that they've developed. So we will build on that this year to continue our response to the 2017 fires.
Thank you, Bill. Round of applause for these. One of the things that really I think is a disservice sometimes in our world is we have this discussion about electeds and staff, and I feel that sometimes the word staff is said in a very diminutive way. These are leaders of action in our community, going after and figuring out how to create sewer systems to go back into communities that were burnt out, reaching forward into the climate projections and changing for the first time that we can see in the United States the way that the Army Corps manages water, or will let us manage water conjunctively with them for drought preparedness, for flash systems, for other things, for showing your learning with the community and sharing in the inconsistencies and being open to that, which is actually the counter is taught to all of us in these management, hierarchical command and control, get it perfect, train it out, use it when it's ready, not deploy it and use it for community preparedness while you do it. Come into a new job, directly go into the heart of the beast, into a fired up community, and to try and figure out how you pull out measurable metrics and then action items with top 10 lists, and you can achieve it, and being under the gun almost every time you come into a supervisor's meeting, and accused of shooting laser beams that ignited and created the wildfires day after day. And then on the other side is that just like we can't talk about just the body without talking about the mind and the spirit. Our community is stronger because of the Wildfire Mental Health Collaborative and everything that we've done. In the midst of a crisis on our budget that didn't have to do with our crisis, but was our behavioral health budget, realignment dollars going down, other issues internally, internal controls that we had to fix, 10-year problem that kind of is having to clean up. I just want to thank you all. Any questions before we move on to our final kind of afternoon session? Yeah.
On the mental health side, and I guess all of this, how did you pay for the people that were going out in the community and doing the services, especially the second time around?
When there's a disaster, the Department of Healthcare Services will apply to FEMA for Crisis Counseling Program CCP funds, and they will outreach to you if you're a county in which a national disaster has been declared, and they will bring in that money, and then there's generally 2 rounds of funding. Funding just to get up and going and organize it, and then funding to continue through, and it's roughly 12 months of funding. Sonoma was a rare instance. The degree of the impact of the wildfire led the feds to offer a 3rd round of funding, and so Sonoma was able to respond to that. And then we were able to, during the floods, to call on those community providers because they're there. When I was in Napa, Supervisor Gore asked me to talk about what should people do. One thing you should do is talk to those folks who want to help in the instance of a disaster ahead of time, and get everybody's phone numbers and have a plan about how you're going to get a hold of each other. Because one of the few things people got angry at me about in Napa were all the providers who were angry I had not called them and given them work to do. So there are people that want to go out and provide help. You don't have to pay them. We ought to pay our community-based organizations. We ought to seek to get funding for them. But when disasters happen, these entities and we want to respond.
I love that you say that, because the amount of people that are turned away for trying to provide help because we have to have control, and we do have to have control. But if we don't have confidence to deploy them, that means we didn't do the work on the front end to develop the plan, to have them know where to go and to provide value. Anybody else?
I just wondered, Christopher, you had mentioned there were 3 counties that had a similar program as to what you have developed, and I wondered what the other 2 were.
So what I mentioned were there are only 3 counties that have community preparedness program manager positions. Generally, the effort to educate the community regarding disaster preparedness is considered an additional duty, an adjunct function of your emergency managers, your planners. Very rarely do you have someone that's communicating only in the disaster preparedness realms, and both of those positions are in Southern California, one in Ventura County and the other one I want to say is Los Angeles, but that's it, yeah. But it's rare. I tell you what, if everyone's responsible for community preparedness, then no one is. And we elected to clearly pin that onto somebody that could lead that effort and maintain focus.
And a part of that is developing the renewed CERT program with trainings coming up in the next year, the COPE organizing and map your neighborhood stuff that's been going on. It's not depending on that person to do all that community organizing work. Actually, we're doing it, for instance, in our district with our staff, is organizing those people with the fire departments so that they're doing pre-attack maps, they're doing evacuation routes, they're justified in what we're doing. We're coming in, I mean, it's once again figuring it out. As you go and doing the best you can.
Yeah, and I would share that we're not trying to compete with Coca-Cola in messaging. We're not going to win. Okay, how long did it take us to all learn recycling? Instead, we're trying to plug into the existing community-based organizations and social networks where there are trusted relationships, especially serving those that are the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. That's where we're trying to leverage and bring content and resources in to move them into action.
I want to finish with one final thing, which is, as much as we're showcasing all this, and this just sounds amazing, what you're not hearing is all of the fits and starts, all of the fails, all of the perceived failures, all of the accusations that each of these people have had to go through. Accusations of character, of being lazy, of being bad government, right? Of not doing the best you can, and then staying with that and continuing to go to the end. That is resilience, and that is how you see something to fruition at the end of the day. There was one comment Chris made that I think is a very important one for what we're at today. He said, I'm going to probably get some crap for saying that. And that is the problem. Too polite, right? We're not willing to call each other out because we're worried about repercussions, worried about maybe all of a sudden you're going to get 5.
But I still said it. So.
Yeah, that's what I say. So say it and just make a disclaimer at the end, right? That's how we do it. A round of applause for all these individuals. Thank you very much. Awesome.